Welcome to Connect with Caro's Expert Series. This is a series where I interview guests that are experts in all topics on mindset, wellness, and relationships. And I tend to bring to you people that I admire, that I love, that I have personal relationships with, and that I know are going to give you such valuable information that you can take with you and start applying in your life immediately. So today I want to welcome you, my friend, Rosemary Ravinal. Rosemary is an executive coach and a public speaker, and she has a very colorful past with working with Univision and corporate America and media. And she has done so many incredible things with TV. And she has an incredible story. I'm going to share with you how I discovered the story. It wasn't because it was public or I didn't know about it. When I met Rosemary, she's probably the most articulate, well-spoken person I had ever met. And as she was communicating with me, I was always so impressed by the way that she conducts herself and the way her presence. She has an incredible presence that you're going to find today. And one day in conversation, I don't know how this came up, Rosemary, but all I remember was her telling me, oh, I struggled with stuttering. I had a stutter at some point. And I was like, that's impossible because this woman has such articulate speech. It can't be that she had a stutter. And it turns out that Rosemary struggled for many years, from childhood all the way to adulthood, with a struggle that was crippling for a huge part of her life, and something she worked very hard to hide. And when I learned of that story, I thought it was so magnificent that she has accomplished all that she has accomplished, that she became a TV personality, that she now helps people with presentation skills and how to speak in public. And I thought people need to know this story. So I have begged Rosemary to be on my Connect with Caro to share with you her personal story and teach you how she overcame her obstacles and how she found the light, literally, like to be in the stage light despite her struggles. So welcome, Rosemary.
Thank you, Caro. It's such a pleasure to be here and to kick off this new year with you. I'm honored to be your guest.
Yes. Couple housekeeping items. Number one, I don't know if you can tell that there's something wrong with my face, but this morning I had an emergency root canal. I had a problem with my tooth last night. I went to the dentist this morning and he said, listen, we got to do a root canal. We got to do it now. So I took the risk, knowing that my half of my face is numb, that I might drool a little bit, that I might speak a little weird. And I thought, what a fascinating day for this to happen to me. I'm speaking with the presentation coach, with the woman who has overcome stuttering. And I'm coming with an impediment of my own, which is like this root canal. And it also reminded me of my dad, because there was many a time where my dad had to be on media, on TV, when he was fighting cancer and no one knew he was sick, and he was doing radiation, he was doing chemo, and he was feeling terrible. And sometimes he was in a lot of pain. And he would always tell me, Caroline, the show must go on. And no matter what he felt like or what he looked like, that man would continue his work and his legacy. And today is my turn to do the same with this a swollen mouth and a root canal. So that, just getting that out there so that you guys know what's going on. And then the other housekeeping item is that Rosemary lives in an area with a lot of planes. So if you hear the noise coming from it sounds like a wind, that is a plane going over her house. So no fear, it'll pass quickly and we'll be able to keep going. If at any point you want to ask a question or you want to raise your hand, you're more than welcome to go into the reactions tab and raise your hand and we'll call on you, or you can put your questions on the chat and I'll get to them as best I can. But let's get started on Rosemary's amazing story. So Rosemary, I'm going to take you back to the very beginning, and I want you to tell me for the how this happened when you were a little girl. When did you start struggling with the stuttering?
First and foremost, stuttering is almost a lifetime condition. It never goes away. It's always there. You're never cured. It is a speech pattern that creeps up periodically. And that perhaps what you're hearing in terms of my ability to enunciate and articulate is an overcompensation for it, which is the way most former stutterers have dealt with it. And I'll get into some of the techniques and how I ended up moving into public speaking, because actually embracing my stutter, or stammer as it's called in some places, is what freed me up to become a public speaker and to use my voice, to tell my own story. But let me tell you where this all started to manifest. I came as a child at age 7.5 from Cuba, and I was put into a Catholic boarding school. I'd never been away from home. Well, it was very traumatic. I was never outside of the country. I was always with my parents. I was never living, in a dorm with hundreds of other girls in a foreign place where I didn't know the language. It became so bad that I wasn't able to speak at all for a good part of a year. I did okay with my tutoring and my academics, but my ability to speak really was muted in a sense, because I was dealing with all of this emotional, psychological stress.
Rosemary, hang on one second. How old were you during this year that you were not able to speak at all?
7.5 to 8.5, almost 9 years old.
So that's when you had just come into this country and then introduced to this new language, this new way of life, very traumatic circumstances. I empathize with you because I'm the child of an immigrant as well. And the way that you manifested that trauma, from what I'm hearing, is you couldn't communicate.
Right. I couldn't speak. And when I started to speak, I realized that I was not able to really make the sounds properly. I started speaking more in English, because that was what my education forced me into. Obviously, if I was going to survive in the educational system, I needed to speak English. And then my Spanish sort of lagged because I wasn't speaking it enough. But the point is that I was in this sort of verbal chaos where I could barely utter sounds. And when I was asked to say something in class, I remember suffering. I had to just brace myself for what's going to come out of my mouth, and risking, of course, what happens to children who stammer. They are ridiculed by their peers. And there is still a tremendous lack of understanding, awareness, empathy for people who speak a little differently. Same could be said for people with accents. And so it's just a matter of, I think we're at a point where we need to sensitize people that stammering, stuttering is something that's affects more than, let's say, 2% of the world's population. It's very common, if indeed it's that little, because many people hide it. They hide it. And in English and Spanish, well, in Spanish in particular, is considered to be a sign of mental deficiency. There is a high stigma that if you stammer, eres un gago, tartamudez, it's like, don't pay attention to what she's saying. She's una gaga. And there's such room for really building understanding of what this is. Thanks to Joe Biden, perhaps he's, president of the United States with a stammer. He has really reluctantly perhaps, puts stuttering sort of on the radar as something that affects many, perhaps even more people than we realize. But as far as childhood, the stammer began and it only exacerbated. I was able to get around it. I've developed great writing skills. My written communication really excelled. That was my way of surviving.
And Rosemary, if I may, you said that most people, this affects 2% of the population that we know of, because most people hide it. And you also hid it, right?
Oh, yes. I didn't know how to hide it at first. I just didn't speak. I didn't speak. I just sat there and, as my parents would say, sit in the corner and look pretty. They weren't receptive or concerned about it. They just thought it was something that I would outgrow. I actually
Mm,
didn't see a voice therapist until I was in college. So I
wow.
dealt with this all this time without any real guidance as to what do I do? Is it going to be a condition for life? Does it mean there's something wrong with me? Are people noticing and marginalizing me? What is, I mean, there's a whole set of cues that you get from regular conversation with people, right? There's understanding, there's signs of acknowledgement and a little love coming back to you. But when you don't see those signs or you don't know how to interpret them, is it ridicule? Is it rejection? Is it sympathy? Are they feel sorry for me? Like, oh, poor girl. And all these things just develop this whole mass of confusion in terms of what is wrong with me. So I grew up thinking there was something wrong with me.
And with your parents, you said that they didn't seem concerned. Uh, did they treat you differently because you spoke differently? Did they treat you like if there's nothing wrong with you, or did you just feel unsupported? I'm curious. I'm
Yeah,
curious about that.
it was. They're both deceased now, so I can speak about them freely. They were very unsupportive. They didn't know what to do. They didn't think, because of their still immigrant mentality of really putting so much of their energies into making a new life in the United States. They did not focus on my best interests academically. I was doing well with my grades. The nuns in the school were highly complimentary about my academic abilities, my intellectual capacity, but they didn't focus. As long as I was doing well in school, it seemed almost as if I would grow out of it, right,
Mhm.
with time. They didn't see it as a problem because I was able to then advance and then eventually went into public school system. But the thing is that it was always there, and I tried to hide it as much as possible by not speaking. Now, eventually, I got to the point, Gato, that I, on my own, recognized that I needed to find models, people I could emulate. And I spent a lot of time alone. I was a latchkey kid for quite some time when I was in public school. I would spend my afternoons after I got home listening to newscasters, trying to mimic their vocal style.
Wow.
Speaking
And how old were you when you were doing this? Because that
like
seems very intuitive.
11, 12, 13. And
Wow.
I always found that is so much, there was so much information to be gained by watching other people do what you wanted to do. So it's almost like do as the pros do as the people you admire do, try to follow their lead, look like them, act like them, speak like them. And I would hold court with these imaginary friends in the living room, and I would be speaking to them as if I was doing a newscast. There was nobody there but me. And I remember there was such gratification in being able to start mimicking the speech patterns. Now, mind you, many stutterers, when we're alone, we don't stutter. It's social phobia. It's in front of other people. The stigma of being judged, of saying something that will make people go, what did she say? And then that impatience that many people will display, like, or they want to fill in the words. They want to say the word for you because they're growing impatient that you can't get the word people out. They're going to say it for you. That's the worst thing that you can do.
Well, and I'm going to mention this because I think it's so appropriate. We're talking about stuttering, but I can't count how many times people have said to me, well, I do much better one-on-one than with a big group of people.
Mhm.
Or I just don't like speaking in public because that social phobia exists, whether you are going to stammer your speech or whether you feel that you're going to sound stupid or you're not funny or you're too boring or you're too long-winded or you say too many ums or you don't you don't think people will respect what you have to say. So I often hear people say, oh, no, I can do very well one-on-one. And by the way, for those of you that are on here, if you want to put on the chat, if you're one of those people that that feels like you do better one-on-one and not with a huge group of people, because there are certain esteem issues, or there are phobias of being around a lot of people. This isn't limited to a stutter. This is universal. I think we all have a little bit of that fear. But that's a very interesting thing, that when you were alone, you didn't suffer from the stammering and the stutter because you weren't nervous, which is really fascinating.
Yes, it goes to perfectionism, the ideal expression of me, wanting to, seeking approval. And I think that that's really a really core idea here. Let's take, as you just did, take stuttering, stammering, and turn it into a metaphor for anything that holds us back. Anything that holds us back from expressing our highest self, the best version of who we are. Now, speaking is one manifestation of one's ideas and one's resources and brilliance. Of course, you could say that music is another avenue of expression, art, right? And written word. So we're talking just about verbal communication here, but we could also bring the stuttering metaphor into other areas of performance, where you're seeking an ideal that's not realistic, whereas you're not honoring the best that you have and trusting that it is what the world needs right now, and that people will accept it because it's authentic in you, that you don't need the approval of anyone to speak, to write, to sing, to paint. Do you follow? So it's very much the same concept. But in me, it was just it's something that if it's not dealt with, if it's not addressed, it just grows and grows and grows. It's similar to depression. And I'll tell you why. Because sometimes depression, it manifests as seeing in the mirror something that doesn't reflect who you think you are. So your external persona, your external personality, presence, profile doesn't match the way you feel inside. And that disconnect causes a lot of suffering. So similarly, I have these words I want to say in my head, but I can't get them out of my mouth because they get stuck. And not only do they get stuck, but then they come with a great deal of strain and artificiality, because I'm working through them. And God forbid anybody should say, you know what, I didn't realize she has a stammer. Oh my God. I mean, then it follows you around, and then it's how do you get rid of it? I mean, it's just this, so it really snowballs into something huge that can affect your life forever.
Wow.
I'm so glad. Yeah, go ahead.
So back to where you're in your room, you are pretending to be a newscaster, you're speaking to this imaginary audience, you're mimicking these newscasters, and you're feeling a lot of gratification. What happens then? Take me from because I want to follow that string. That story is fascinating to me.
What happens then is that it became my own fantasy world. I wasn't able to take it anyplace else. It stayed there. But at the first opportunity that I had, even before I got to, that was actually in my first year of college, was that I got a chance to work in broadcasting, because my skill was writing. I was the editor of the school paper in high school, and then in college at Adelphi University for undergraduate. So I was very, very good wordsmith. And journalism was the career that I wanted to pursue. But then with it came the broadcast journalism part. And so the radio station had a relationship with the school paper where I was asked to give some highlights. And of course, that was suffering, pain, anguish for weeks. I broke out in hives. But I said to myself, the microphone could be my salvation. The microphone is live. It is all those people that I've been talking to for years in my living room and in my imaginary world. They're all there in that microphone. I've got to do it right. I have to find the way that when I start speaking into that device, it's good. It's not scrambled. It's not pausing. It doesn't have any kind of sign of irregularity. There can be no impairment.
I have to commend you, because I don't know that if I had been in your position, I would have had the courage to think, I just need to make this good. I think maybe if I had been put in that position, I, I don't know. I mean, I'm not in your position, right? But if I had been put in that position, would I have felt like, you know what? I cannot speak. I wasn't gifted that verbal capacity. I must be a writer. I must hide behind the camera. I must be a behind the scenes kind of person. And I feel that people adopt those beliefs early on and they never really challenge those beliefs. They just, that becomes their life. So I'm fascinated by your ability to, by yourself, without support of your parents, without a counselor, without a life coach or a therapist, for you to have challenged your own belief that you weren't meant to be in the spotlight, that you could get better. Do you, I know that maybe you did this intuitively, but do you know why you did this or how you had the courage to do this?
Well, I don't recall exactly, except I know that I suffered. I suffered greatly in the process of preparing for it. My then boyfriend was director of news for the radio station WBAU. Perhaps that has something to do with it, but I think it was more intuitive. I wanted so desperately to speak clearly, to speak English without an accent, and to speak Spanish at the same time. I didn't quite recognize the value of being fully bilingual until much later, until I started my career. But I wanted to maybe pass really as an English native speaker. And I felt that that was just something intuitively that I just needed to do because I had suffered for so many years with my inability to articulate my thoughts and put sentences together in a way that didn't flag like there's something wrong here. And what I instinctively did is I found substitutions, and that's very common for people who stutter. So if I can't say the word R, with it starts with an R, and I still sometimes stumble with the R word, right? My name is Rosemary Ravinal, for God's sake, it has two R's. But even my last name, after I got past the Rosemary, I would stumble on the Ravinal. So I can't change my name, but in some cases where I could substitute another word for the R word, or P words were always death, I would find another word that meant the same thing. So by doing that substitution, I started to find some self-made solutions. Later on, when I started working with a voice therapist, there were breathing exercises, for example, that would mean when I was about to say a word that was a trouble word, a stumble word, I would take a deep breath, break up the phrase, take a breath, take the inhale, and then get into the difficult word. Or if it's a word like multiple syllables, sustainability, I would break it up into syllables. So I would accentuate each syllable, sustainability. May sound a little awkward, but at least I didn't stumble on a stammer. I didn't stutter it. You follow? And so that was my workaround. The breathing exercises, the pausing, the deep diaphragm breathing. I mean, there were all kinds of some wacky things, such as I never did the marbles in the mouth. There's I'm not sure if it's real, but there is a famous Greek scholar named Demosthenes, and he's famously was a statesman who stuttered. And because he had a lot that he wanted to accomplish to claim his inheritance, for which he was being taken away from the inheritance, and so he had to defend his birthright, he locked himself in a closet in a storage room for months with marbles and all kinds of techniques where he was determined to rid himself of the stutter. And eventually he did, and he got to the tribunal and he was able to defend himself like a statesman. So it has been embellished in some way, but the marbles in the mouth, I think there was some reference to that in the famous movie, The King's Speech, or the book that inspired the movie. So all these things, whatever it takes, you have to find first acceptance that I am a stutterer. And I will always be. There's that tendency, it creeps up sometimes in rather nefarious ways, but it's still there. So I have to really be very deliberate about it. So acceptance, self-compassion, self-love. And I'm saying this because it has obviously applications across all the different fields of human endeavor, right?
Mm.
And so that self-compassion, that patience, and that understanding that if you believe in what you're saying, people will follow you, people will accept it, people will listen. The authenticity and the honesty of the ideas is something that resonates more than the technical part of how you are transmitting them. Yes,
Mm.
it's nice to have clear diction and to be able to speak on a stage to many people or to speak one-on-one with clarity. But I think we need to give more emphasis to the quality of our ideas and the source of those ideas and make sure that you really believe them with full, full passion. I mean, it has to be real. Most of my career was spent saying other people's words, such as when I was reading a teleprompter or when I was doing corporate spokesperson work, where I was mouthing the libretto for other people, for other causes, for other interests. Now that I'm doing it for myself, it's very liberating because now I'm able to express my own ideas with no constraints.
So when you had this opportunity, this first one, that you had the hives and you were in pain, and how you were practicing for weeks and you had this opportunity to, I guess, to be on camera, right?
No, to be, this is radio, it was
Or
radio.
to be on radio. And on the day of, how'd you do?
I survived. I survived. It wasn't great. It wasn't obviously a stuttered delivery. I managed. I spoke slowly. I spoke timidly. No one said anything. No one said anything. And they invited me back. So I figured, okay, this is step one.
Well, I think that's important because you didn't start sounding like you sound now. You didn't have the presence that you have now back then, and you still put yourself out there. And I think that's important for all of us to understand is if you put yourself out there, you are going to improve. You're going to get the hang of it. So you might go from surviving to thriving, but you're not going to get to thriving if you never feel what it's like to just feel like you're surviving.
Yes, no, exactly. And I would say that, look, over the course of my life, and I've had several decades on this earth, many decades, is there are highs and lows. There are times when the courage just becomes so clearly accessible. And then there's times when it's not. It sort of goes into hiding, goes into remission, sort of goes into the back room. And you say, well, 10 years or so later, I've said, where did I find it? How come I can't summon it again? It's cyclical. You don't just do it and it becomes just this steady ascent. There are stumbles. There are sort of setbacks that happen periodically. It has to do with life situations and circumstances and successes and failures where the default is one of self-talk of, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. I have an impairment. I don't belong here. And so that becomes rather a default that thankfully, I think I've overcome that, or I've sort of left it way behind me. It's always there. And so I'm saying it's sort of a set point, right? Where it's always there. So they say that if you have the tendency to be depressed, there's always a set point towards happiness, right? Your set point may be lower for some people, whereas you tend to have a cheerful, joyful nature. It might be just easier to reach those highs than it would be for someone else.
Yeah, it's like you have a temperature.
Yes.
We talk about that. Some people have they have different set base temperatures.
Yeah, and so it's just interesting that now there is someone who is about to release a book named his name is John Hendrickson, and he put the Joe Biden story sort of on the map in a story for The Atlantic, where he's a senior editor, and he wrote about and he interviewed President Biden about his speech issues all his life and how he dealt with them, and Joe Biden was rather reluctant to speak about it, but at the urging of Mr. Biden's sister, he sort of came out with it, and thankfully he did, because it's helped a great deal of these closet stutterers come out and embrace it and either seek help to ameliorate it. Ameliorated, you never really overcome it. It's always there. Some scientists say, some behavioral scientists say that it's neurological, and I honestly think that that's BS. I think this has a lot to do with emotional state, and that's at least I can say from my experience. But the stutter in the way we communicate ideas, our willingness to speak out in a meeting. Let's put it on the level of everyday business life. How many times do we sit in a meeting, Gato, and we want to say something, but we think to ourselves, oh, they don't want to hear from me. I'm just new here. Or maybe my idea is going to sound silly. Or maybe I'll hold off until the end. If nobody asks any questions, I'll raise my hand. And then when we do summon the courage to raise our hand and ask a question, we will preface it with a hedging phrase that says, oh, this may not be pertinent, but, or worse, I could be wrong, but. That to me is a stutter. That is a stutter. Your ideas are not flowing properly because you're telling yourself that your idea, your question, your query isn't valid. Oh, somebody may have asked this already. Or, it's how often do you hear that? You hear that in a Zoom call. You hear that in a live meeting. You hear that even when you ask a shop attendant for help. Oh, you may not have my size, but. Do you have a size 6 dress? Do you have this? It's like, just ask it. Just ask it. We're aware of those speech patterns that are limiting speech patterns. We could be released to be much more powerful in every aspect of our communication.
So you've said this word a couple times, and I'm curious to understand it better, to understand the difference between embracing and overcoming. So you said you've embraced your stutter, you've embraced the fact that you are a stutterer, and you've also worked really hard to correct it so that you can speak with clarity, and maybe it never goes away, but it definitely isn't something that pops up. And the reason I'm thinking about this is because when my father came to this country, just like you, he was an immigrant, he learned how to speak English, but he had a thick Cuban accent.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
for many years, he was a TV personality and a presenter in Spanish. And people had been telling him, his counselors had been telling him that he should venture into English content because in the United States, you get paid a lot more than you do in Latin America, right? So what you could get paid as an English speaker is way higher at the time than a Spanish speaker. But he never did because he was embarrassed about his accent. Until one day he was watching television and Henry Kissinger came on, and his friend said to him, Joaquin, Henry Kissinger has an accent and he speaks. Why can't you speak with your accent? What's the difference? At that point, my father understood that this no longer had to be an impediment. He embraced his accent. Yes. And for the rest of his life, he was an English and Spanish speaker. He was bilingual, made a lot of money doing that, had a lot of success, and used that story many, 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 many times in his career, to the point that I can reiterate it because I've heard it so many times. Mm-hmm. But he did not correct his accent. He used his accent. Mm-hmm. In your case, you have corrected the stammer. You are not stammering. So I'd love to understand, in your opinion, what the difference is between embracing and overcoming or correcting, or, because I think it could go either way. You could speak with a stammer, or you could you could speak with clarity. You could speak with an accent, or you could try to eliminate your accent. Either way, I think there's value to both.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Your father's story is delightful because he found the uniqueness, the sweetness of his voice. That's who he is. As long as you understood, and I work with a lot of bilingual executives who are, usually start our discovery session by saying, oh, I think I need a accent reduction coach. Well, that's not what I do. I will work with what you have. And I think that if you embrace what you have and your speech patterns, yeah, make it more understandable. There may be some words that are difficult to your tongue because there are words in English that are, as they are in Spanish, that are difficult to say. So find some other way of saying the same thing. So working around it, working with your natural abilities. One of the things I found in the therapy, the voice therapies, many different teachers that I went to, none of them were really very effective. My childhood experience of doing it on my own was actually more effective. But they wanted to give me a different voice. They wanted to quelch my natural ability, and they wanted to give me someone else's voice. Similarly, when you go to
What do you mean by that? How does somebody give you somebody else's voice? I
a
don't
different
understand.
speech pattern, a different way of saying things, where you might have a broadcast voice, today is January 10th, 2023. It's like it's having different inflection and different cadence as a way to deal with a stammer tends to be rather static. It's very monotone. You get stuck in a pitch and you don't have much vocal variety because you're so concerned with getting past those sounds that you don't really have the bandwidth to be able to use your voice, for to convey emotion and for all those qualities that we as public speakers recognize as important when we're telling our story. However, the speech therapist would try to just give me someone else's speech pattern, and that's very difficult to do. It's not natural. It feels awkward. It feels as awkward as learning another language, a foreign language with which you have had no experience or there's no context. And I think that your father's example just shows that that there is an acceptance for the quality of the ideas and information that he was using to transform people's lives and their knowledge. That far overrode any other issues. There's so many people we know today who are thought leaders. Take Arianna Huffington. She has this very heavy accent, and she does every kind of media you could imagine. Henry Kissinger, of course, perhaps was the one who sort of made it okay to do so. And so there's many world leaders, statesmen, even actors, who have embraced their speaking style as part of the characters that they portray.
So what I'm hearing from you is that although you worked hard to be articulate so that you could not be nervous, not get stuck in a pattern, be able to communicate effectively, you also worked hard to keep your uniqueness and your individuality and your voice as it was, with the intention of being clear.
Yeah, clarity was first and foremost.
Yeah.
And in the last decade, when I decided after leaving Univision and the corporate world that I wanted to really speak my voice, that I have now really been focused on, what am I modeling for people who follow me, people who work with me, and what am I modeling and giving my best. And it's always a work in progress. We're never quite finished. There's always another way of doing it because obviously our audiences will vary and they may require different techniques and different ways of sharing our knowledge with them through the use of our voice.
Yeah.
And different modalities. Certainly Zoom has given us another stage where we need to speak perhaps with more enunciation, more clarity, because we're going through devices that may not be optimized for audio.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what do you say to the people that say, well, I'm just comfortable being behind the scenes. I don't ever want to, turn on my camera on Zoom, or I never want to be on a stage, or I'm just not a public speaker kind of person. Do you have an opinion on that? Do you think everybody should have the ability to speak in public, or is it an interest thing? Should it be based on desire? What do you think?
I think that where we are today in the world, our ability to speak to other people, to disagree, to debate ideas is critical. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to be on a stage with 1,000 people or that you have to be in a broadcast interview. But I think we all need to have a certain power of expression. I mean, it could be arguing your opposition to something that your community association is doing, or going to City Hall and arguing against something that will affect your livelihood. Whatever it is, I mean, we need to at least have a minimal basis for being able to use our voice. Now, other people will have surrogates doing it for them, and that could be fine. Not everyone is cut out to be a public speaker. However, at a very, very basic level, we have to be clear. We have to be clear with our children. We have to be clear with our spouses, right? And we have to have a good communication patterns. Now, articulation may not necessarily be as critical, but I think we need to emphasize the clarity of the idea, the clarity, conciseness, the compelling nature of what you're saying, and the truthful nature, and to be direct. The examples I gave about people asking questions and being sort of obfuscating and being, circular in their speech patterns, not coming out with the point, that just dilutes everything, and our credibility suffers.
You're right. You're right. So even in regular life, I love the idea of we should all have the ability to express ourselves, even if it's within our home life, whether the circle of influence is small or large. Your ability to use your voice is important, and in a way that conveys ideas, and that you can convey your point, and you can get across what you're trying to get across. I think that's really important. So where would you begin in building the self-confidence to put yourself out there? How in your case, I'm still fascinated, and I'm harping on it, but I still think it's an incredible thing that you found that self-confidence within you to get through that first radio interview, that first broadcasting opportunity. So where do you find that self-confidence? Where do you build on that?
Well, it's no secret that everyone who speaks gets nervous to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's a certain amount of, I believe, preparation, thought, organizing thoughts. Like, I prepared for our conversation today. I said to myself, what ideas do I want to convey to Garo's audience? Because I have a responsibility to you and to the audience to give you something that will be of value, that you can take away and you can apply to your lives in some way. So how do I organize my ideas? So there's certain preparation involved. Being nervous is totally natural. And as our friend Dave Brigger would say, you have to turn your nerves into service, because you are always serving other people every time you communicate. It's not, I think the most important thing is that we need to stop asking for approval. Stop doing this. Most often we speak and we want approval. We want to be loved. We want people to say, isn't that wonderful? Isn't that like the best? Applause, applause, applause. It's not always that. It's just, if we stop seeking approval and validation, that frees us up to do a heck of a lot of other things. So I want to get back to your point about turning on your camera when you do a Zoom call. Yes. I want to just remind everybody here, if you are not, and I know that this is not necessarily the forum for it, because it's, what I mean. There's so many calls that we are on, even when I do training, and I can't get the people that I'm training to turn on their cameras. It's as if you're not present, you're absent. You might as well consider yourself absent. Unless you're driving, I really have very little tolerance. There he is, very little tolerance for people who just refuse. Why? Because I'm having a bad hair day, or because I don't feel good today, or because I'm still in my pajamas. You know what? You wouldn't show up to work in your pajamas. You're going to work, or you wouldn't show up to a conference or to a book event, right? Or to a community meeting in your pajamas. You would have some modicum of, presence, and you would show up. It's the same thing. It's like you're doing FaceTime, not FaceTime the app, but you're doing FaceTime with people. And our body, our expressions, our micro expressions, and our body language conveys easily more than half of the information of the concepts that we want to convey to people. If we're using our body, it's a great deficiency. We're cheating ourselves, and we're cheating the other people who are listening to us.
And at the beginning, when you first started talking about the techniques that you learned to be able to communicate properly, you were talking about breathing exercises and pausing, and what I was hearing was you were learning mindfulness. You were learning how to be very mindful of what you were doing, and by taking those pauses and by breathing and by being present in that forum, you were able to communicate more clearly. And I think that can apply to this. When we have the option to turn our cameras off, we have the option to not be mindful or present. We can be writing emails, texting, talking to somebody else. We could be doing other things as opposed to being present in the moment, which has become very hard to do because we have learned how to multitask all the time and just be in 100 different places all the time. So I think in that may be where you're triggered by that, is that you've done so much work to be present that you want to inspire others to be present, because in that presence is where you communicate the best.
And that's totally correct. I'm totally with you, Gato, on that. But remember, it's also, if we're not having fun doing this, if we're not enjoying this on some level, then you ask yourself, is it worth it? Because that shows.
Yeah.
I want to mention something about what typically people will say is a stumbling block to good speaking in public, which is the filler words, our famous filler words, the word whiskers. That is to some extent a form of stuttering, because you are stumbling on sounds that are not words. They're not intelligible. They are the ums and the ahs and all those sounds. I disagree with the fact, well, sometimes the word so is considered a filler word, but there are people who just habitually use these irrelevant sounds to fill in for what could be meaningful words. And that is something that people often cite as, oh no, I've got to get rid of the filler words. It's all that same process of being clear in terms of what you want to say. It's thinking in the moment, not thinking 2 sentences ahead or thinking about what you left behind, really being in the moment and taking good breaths, having good posture, being aware of your surroundings, being aware of the people you're talking to, having a sense of presence and poise and gravitas. We are walking, living brands. And I just recorded a video where I said, if you checked your public speaking, your speaker's toolbox for this year, I mean, everything we are is part of our brand. How aware are we of the way we show up? And all of these things, I think, affect the way we use our vocal toolbox. And that's it. It's not just dealing with the filler words and the ums and the ahs and eradicating that. That's just one symptom of not having a clear path to expressing your ideas.
Yeah. And I would ask, I've had clients tell me that they're afraid of speaking in public because of those words. And I never discourage anyone from speaking in public because of a filler word. I don't think that I don't think it makes a terrible speaker just because you use filler words. Like you said before, the context and the content and the power in your ideas, I think, matters more than whether you use filler words or not. Do you agree with me?
Totally. You can be a brilliant speaker and use tons of filler words as long as you're getting your ideas across. I mean, you hear them on broadcast interviews often. Usually it's someone who's trying to obfuscate, trying to hide something, is not clear about, or wants to hold something back. So it's rather, sometimes comes across as rather suspicious. But there are other people who have that speech pattern who say meaningful, relevant things. I think that can be just an excuse for the same with people who have heavy accents. Oh no, I can't give that. I can't give that a speech in front of my employees because I have an accent. I can't do that media interview because I won't be understood. I think that that's just, again, it's that stutter that holds us back,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
So if you have a stutter, whether it shows up in the form of an accent or an actual stutter or filler words or inability to communicate your ideas because you circle in loops, the idea is that you do it anyway, right? Is that and
Yes.
then you get like people can hire Rosemary to coach them on their presentation skills. You can hire Dave Bricker, who teaches you how to tell a good story. You can hire me to work on your mindset, but you don't have to wait until you've been coached to start. You can start where you are with
Exactly.
that courage.
Precisely. The more you do it, the better you get at it. And you're never done. That's why programs like Toastmasters are so valuable. It's like going to the speaker gym. It's humbling, but it's necessary. There are days when I say something in a meeting and I end up with like 10 filler words like ums. I said, where did they come from? I didn't know I was saying them. It's important. It's important to have a checks and balances and to keep working on our craft. But that's a very specific environment. But to your point, having these so-called stumbling blocks should not be anything that holds people back. Just be more aware of what you're saying, how you're saying it. And for women in particular, I think we have a tendency to hold back because we may just, and I hope this is not true for future generations, we minimize the value of what we have to say. We we think that what we are offering is not at the level that may be expected of us. That's BS. That's just ridiculous. We just have to just come out and say it clearly with conviction, with authenticity and honesty.
Yeah. And we're getting close to the end. So I have two last questions for you, but I'm going to loop you back to what you said about courage coming in seasons. I thought that was really, really powerful. And I want to bring it back and reiterate it. You said in all the decades that you've lived, there have been some decades where you've had more courage and some where you can't find that courage, right? Where it doesn't
Yes.
show up the same way. And I've experienced that as well. I've thought sometimes, man, I was so bold when I was younger, and then I've become more timid or more unaware. And then I found that boldness again. And I know other people who've experienced that. And I never heard anyone talk about this courage coming in these cycles. So, and courage when I think of courage, I also think of tapping into your resilience, which is the R in core. So for me, it's very important to address this, which is if you are in a season where maybe you've had courage in the past, but right now you are dealing with a stutter in your life, whether it's in any aspect of your life, and you're having a hard time tapping into that courage that maybe you had once or that you've had in other areas of your life, but you can't find it here. How do you revisit that? How do you get it back? How do for you that you've lived so many decades and you've had these cycles, how do you bring that cycle back for all of us that want to tap into that again?
You need to forgive yourself. Let me tell you a quick story. About 11 years ago, I got divorced, and it was very impactful for me. I went back to school, got my master's after many, many years, and then I went back into the work world. I felt ill at ease. I felt that my footing wasn't sure. I was in a meeting with important people in the community, and it was my turn to speak. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. I couldn't make a sound. And then I realized I started coughing to say, excuse me, come back to me. And I made up that I was coughing, that I had something in my throat because I couldn't get a sound out. It was terrifying. No one realized because I've learned how to hide it. I couldn't get a sound out. And when it was my turn to speak, I found that I was bashful, timid. It's almost as if I'd been out of the loop for a while, and suddenly it's like I'm here again, and I feel so uncomfortable. I feel so unsure. I feel like I'm out of practice. And it was a terrifying moment. But the more I went back and I kept going to meetings and speaking and and it came back. But that moment was pure panic.
Mm. And then,
And then things started to fall into place. But there are moments of when you say that there are cycles, and we fall back. Similarly, when you have a natural or athletic ability and you stop doing what you do so well and you go back to it. Like if I went back to tennis now, I'd be ridiculously bad because I haven't played in so long. But I was able to do it well and skillfully for quite some time. Like anything else, it's a matter of using your assets, using your talents.
mm. So what I'm hearing is even if you fall back, you don't stay there.
Of course not.
You just
Of course not.
you pick yourself up again and you attempt again and you recognize. I think if we can get anything from what you just taught us is the understanding and I don't know what the right word is, but it's the understanding that this is not forever, that you may not be courageous forever, but you're also not going to be scared forever, right? You can go into these cycles and you can tap into that resilience. And then maybe if you lose it, then you give yourself some grace, you forgive yourself, and then you tap into it again. And I think there's a lot of power in that knowledge because it gives us peace of mind that we're not stuck in this loop forever.
Yes, and perhaps in that meeting that I just described, if I had said to people, there were mostly women in the room, I haven't spoken for so long. Please forgive me because I'm so out of practice. They might have been very, very compassionate, and they might have related in some level to what I was going through at that moment, having come from a major life-changing, situation. So I didn't dare to go there. I decided to hide it. But I think we'll find that if we expose ourselves and tell people how we're really feeling, we'll find a great deal of understanding.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And that goes to the emotional intelligence. It's right. It's allowing yourself to be vulnerable and allowing yourself to connect with people on an emotional level. So for everyone that's here, I have a program called CORE, and the 4 skills that I teach are clarity, organization, resilience, and emotional intelligence. And I think, Rosemary, you are such an example of all of these 4 skills, how you've had that clarity and you've struggled to become clear, both in your physical, but also your mental and emotional states. I think it's absolutely beautiful. And how you've tapped into your resilience and manage your emotions. It's absolutely beautiful. So thank you for this interview. I hope everybody got something wonderful about it. We have some people thanking us for this inspirational food. I love it. It's food for our soul. Beautiful. Thank you, everyone. How can they reach you, Rosemary, if they want a presentations coach or they want executive coaching of their own and they want to shine their light and find that courage that you've been able to conquer?
You can find me at rosemaryravinal.com. There's no one else on the planet, I think. If anybody knows of another Rosemary Ravinal, please tell me. rosemaryravinal.com is my website. You can sign up for my mailing list. There are many blogs, videos, instructional material. I work in English and Spanish, and I work in Miami and everywhere and anywhere with executives and with individuals.
And if you want to find her on Instagram, I believe you're under Rosemary Speaks.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
Which you can also, if you come to my Instagram at Caroline De Posada, you'll find that I've tagged her in a lot of my posts, so you can find her easily. Send her a DM, tell her how she's impacted your life, and keep keep in touch with us, because we love to hear from you and we love to know that we are making a difference in this world. So thank you everyone for coming. And I hope you've enjoyed this Power Hour with Rosemary Ravinal. Bye, everyone.